If you were to stand on the surface of the moon and look back across the dark, silent void of space, you would see a sight that stands in stark defiance of the rest of the solar system. You would see a brilliant sapphire sphere wrapped in swirling white clouds, gleaming against the endless black backdrop. It looks peaceful. It looks inviting. It looks like a jewel. But to a cosmologist, this blue marble is more than just beautiful. It is a problem. It is a paradox. By all the laws of physics and planetary formation, that water shouldn't be there. We live on a planet that is 70% covered in liquid water, yet we orbit a star that is a nuclear furnace. We exist in a zone of the solar system where heat should have boiled every drop of moisture away billions of years ago. The Earth should be a dry, scorched rock, as barren as Mercury or as dusty as Mars. But instead, we are drowning in oceans. This water is the defining feature of our world, the cradle of our biology, and the solvent of our existence. But its origin is one of the deepest, most contested mysteries in science. Did it fall from the sky in a rain of comets? Did it bleed from the rocks themselves? Or is it a ghost from a time before the Earth even existed? Tonight, we trace the origin of the oceans. We will go back to the time of fire, to the age of the great rains, and uncover the secret history of the water in your glass. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. To understand why our oceans are such a mystery, we must first look at our neighbors. The inner solar system is a neighborhood of rock and fire. Mercury, the closest planet to the sun, is a blistered, airless world of iron and stone, baked by solar radiation. Venus, our twin in size, is a hellscape of crushing atmospheric pressure and runaway greenhouse heat, where any water that might have existed boiled off into space eons ago. Mars, the red planet, is a frozen desert, a place where water exists only as ice trapped in the polar caps or buried deep underground, a fossil of a wetter past. And then there is Earth. We are the anomaly. We are the only planet in the universe that we know of where water exists in all three states simultaneously, as ice, as vapor, and crucially, as liquid. We are a water world in a region of space that is fiercely hostile to water. The sheer volume of it is staggering. There are over 1.3 billion kilometers of water on our surface. It fills basins 5 deep. It carves canyons. It saturates the atmosphere, and it flows through the veins of every living thing. This abundance defies the standard model of how planets are built. In the violent, hot, swirling disk of dust and gas from which the solar system formed, the area close to the young sun was simply too hot for water to condense. It should have been vaporized, blown outward to the edges of the system by the solar wind. The Earth formed in this dry zone. It was born from dry rocks in a dry region under a hot star. So when you look at the Pacific Ocean, you are looking at something that theoretically should not exist. It is an alien substance that has somehow found a home where it doesn't belong. To find out how it got here, we have to look at the invisible boundary that divides our solar system in two. Astronomers have mapped an invisible boundary in space, a thermal border known as the frost line or the snow line. It works on the same principle as a campfire on a cold night. Close to the fire, it is too hot for snow to exist. Water can only exist as steam or vapor. But if you walk far enough away into the darkness, you cross a threshold where the temperature drops low enough for water to freeze into solid ice. In the early solar system, this line was located roughly somewhere between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Everything inside this line, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, formed in the dry zone. Here, the intense heat of the young sun vaporized any volatile compounds like water. The dust grains that clumped together to build our planet were rocky and metallic, stripped of their moisture. But beyond the line, out in the cold expanses where the gas giants dwell, water was abundant. It froze into hard rock like crystals of ice, forming vast reservoirs of comets and icy moons. According to the laws of planetary formation, the Earth sits on the wrong side of the fence. We are built from the dry dust of the inner system, yet we are covered in the ice of the outer system. The birth of our planet was not a gentle accumulation of matter. It was a violent, chaotic demolition derby. 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth grew by accretion. Countless asteroids, planetesimals, and rocks smashed into one another, their gravity pulling them together into a growing sphere. Each one of these collisions released a tremendous amount of kinetic energy, which was instantly converted into heat. The young Earth was not just hot, it was molten. In this forge of creation, even if there had been traces of water trapped inside the original rocks, the intense heat of accretion would likely have boiled it away. It would have outgassed, rising as steam and stripped away by the fierce solar wind of the newborn sun, which was far more active and violent than the star we know today. The standard model suggests that the infant Earth was a bone-dry rock, a sterile ball of magma orbiting in a dust cloud. It had iron for a core and silicates for a mantle, but it lacked the volatile ingredients of life. It was a world without a drop of blue. Let us go back to that time, the Hadean Aeon. The name comes from Hades, the Greek underworld, and it is an appropriate title. If you were to look at the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, you would not recognize it. There were no continents. There was no green. There was no sea. The surface was a churning, glowing ocean of molten rock, a global lava field that radiated heat into the dark vacuum of space. The sky above this magma ocean was not blue. It was likely a hazy, toxic orange or red, choked with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and vaporized rock. The atmospheric pressure would have been crushing. In this hellish landscape, water was a physical impossibility. Any molecule of H2O that touched the surface would have instantly flashed into steam and been lost to the upper atmosphere. This was the 0 point of our planet. It was a world of fire defined by the absolute absence of the liquid that now covers it. And yet, looking at this burning sphere, we know that something miraculous was about to happen. Somehow this ball of fire had to cool, and the dry rock had to become wet. The transformation from the Hadean hell to the water world is the greatest metamorphosis in the history of the solar system. Just as the young Earth began to cool, just as it might have started to form a thin, fragile crust, the universe delivered a blow that reset the clock entirely. This is the giant impact hypothesis. It suggests that about 412 billion years ago, the Earth was not alone in its orbit. It was stalked by another planetary body, a Mars-sized world that scientists have named Theia. The collision was inevitable. They slammed into the proto-Earth with a force that is beyond human comprehension. It was not merely an impact, it was a merger. The violence of this event liquefied the planet completely. It blasted trillions of tons of molten rock into orbit, a ring of fire that would eventually coalesce to form our moon. But for the story of water, this moment is critical, because it was a sterilization event. The heat generated by the impact was so intense that it would have vaporized any volatile atmosphere the Earth had managed to cling to. If there were puddles, if there were early shallow seas or even damp rocks, they were instantly annihilated. The water molecules were blasted out into the vacuum, lost forever. The Earth was left spinning, wobbling, and utterly parched. It was a reset button that guaranteed a bone-dry beginning. After the violence of the Theia impact, a profound silence fell over the solar system. The debris cleared. The moon settled into its orbit, and the Earth began the long, slow process of healing. The magma ocean, once churning and white-hot, began to darken as heat radiated out into space. The surface temperature dropped. A skin began to form on the surface of the lava. This was the first crust. It was likely a jagged black landscape of basalt and obsidian, brittle and unstable, constantly cracking and sinking back into the molten depths below. Imagine a world of black glass under a faint distant sun. There was still no sound of wind, for there was barely an atmosphere. There was no sound of waves. The only noise was the ticking of cooling rock and the deep low rumble of the mantle beneath. It was a dry, silent, monochromatic world. The vessel was ready. The cup was formed. But it was empty. The planet was a parched desert, floating in the dark, waiting for a drink that it could not provide for itself. The water had to come from somewhere else. It had to be delivered, and about 3.9 billion years ago, the delivery service arrived. The solar system was not the stable clock. Work mechanism we see today. The giant planets Jupiter and Saturn were migrating, shifting their orbits in a gravitational dance that threw the rest of the system into chaos. Their immense gravity acted like a slingshot, disrupting the orbits of millions of asteroids and comets residing in the cold outer reaches of the system. These icy rocks were hurled inward toward the sun and directly into the path of the Earth. This era is known as the Late Heavy Bombardment. For millions of years, the sky fell. The Earth was hammered by a rain of cosmic debris. These were not small meteors. They were mountain-sized chunks of rock and ice slamming into the black crust with the force of nuclear arsenals. Looking up from the surface, the night sky would have been a terrifying kaleidoscope of streaks and flashes. This was not a disaster. It was a supply run. These impactors were the carriers, the cosmic freighters loaded with the one thing Earth lacked. They were bringing the volatile compounds, the frozen gases, and most importantly, the ice that would eventually turn the black planet blue. When scientists first began to look for the source of Earth's water, their eyes turned naturally to the outer solar system. There, drifting in the cold, dark beyond Neptune, are the comets. These are the dirty snowballs of the cosmos, ancient remnants from the dawn of the solar system, composed largely of frozen gas, dust, and water ice. They are spectacular carriers. When a comet falls toward the inner solar system, the sun heats it and it releases a magnificent tail of vapor, a visual proof of the water locked inside. For decades, it was the leading theory that these comets were the architects of our oceans. It made perfect sense. During the late heavy bombardment, millions of these icy bodies would have been flung toward Earth. Each impact would have delivered a massive payload of ice which would melt instantly upon entry or impact, adding to the growing steam atmosphere of the young planet. It was a romantic notion, the idea that our oceans are essentially melted comets, that the water in our veins fell from the farthest, coldest reaches of the galaxy. It suggested that the Earth was just a dry bucket filled up over time by a cosmic hose. But science demands evidence, not just elegant theories. To prove that comets filled our oceans, we had to taste them. We had to compare the chemical signature of the water on Earth with the water on a comet. Water is not always just H2O. Sometimes the hydrogen atom carries an extra neutron, turning it into deuterium, or heavy hydrogen. The ratio of normal water to heavy water acts like a fingerprint. It tells you where the water was made and under what conditions. In 2014, the Rosetta spacecraft performed a miracle of navigation, catching up with Comet 67P after a 10-year chase through the void. It dropped a lander P onto the icy surface to sniff the water vapor. The results were a shock. The water on the comet was heavy. It had a deuterium ratio 3 times higher than the water in our oceans. It was a mismatch. If our oceans had been delivered by comets like 67P, the chemistry of our world would be fundamentally different. This discovery ruled out the comets as the primary source. The romantic theory collapsed. The dirty snowballs may have added a sprinkle of water here and there, but they did not fill the basin. The true carrier was something else, something far less obvious. The investigation turned from the icy comets to their drier, rockier cousins, the asteroids. Specifically, a class of ancient space rocks known as carbonaceous chondrites. To the naked eye, these look like ordinary dull gray stones. They do not shimmer with ice. They do not have tails, but appearances in space are deceiving. These rocks are like ice sponges. Their mineral structure is rich in hydrous clays, minerals that have water molecules locked tightly inside their crystal lattice. They can contain up to 20% water by weight. These asteroids formed closer to the Earth in the asteroid belt, a region that is cold enough for some water to survive, but not cold enough to make pure ice. During the bombardment, it was likely these wet rocks that rained down in the trillions. They didn't bring water as liquid or ice, but as dampness trapped in stone. As they smashed into the Earth, the heat of the impact liberated the water, releasing it as steam. It was not a sudden flood, but a slow, grinding accumulation. Meteor by meteor, pebble by pebble, the oceans were delivered in the form of hydrated dust. This is the late veneer theory. It suggests that the blue of our world is essentially a paint job, a thin, wet coating delivered by rocky freighters that arrived just after the planet had finished forming. For a long time, the story of water was a story of delivery. We assumed the Earth was a dry vessel that had to be filled by an external hand. But in recent years, A new and radical theory has emerged, one that challenges the very idea of a dry birth. What if the water didn't fall from the sky? What if it was already here, hidden from the very beginning? This is the inside job hypothesis. It suggests that the dust grains that originally coalesced to form the Earth were not as dry as we thought. Even in the heat of the inner solar system, water molecules might have clung to dust particles trapped inside the chemical structure of the rock itself. If this is true, then the Earth was born pregnant with oceans. As the planet formed, as the gravity crushed the dust into rock and the rock into a planet, that water was buried. It was locked away deep in the mantle, in the hot, pressurized rock, thousands of miles beneath the surface. Sea. The oceans we see today are not an alien coating. They are the sweat of the planet. They are the result of the Earth exhaling the moisture it has held since the moment of its conception. It forces us to look at the ground differently. The solid rock is not a barrier to water. It might be the greatest reservoir of all. This idea sounds impossible. How can solid rock hold water, especially in the crushing heat of the Earth's interior? To prove it, scientists had to recreate the hellish conditions of the mantle. They used a device called a diamond anvil cell. They took tiny samples of mineral, placed them between the tips of two gem-quality diamonds, and squeezed. They generated pressures equivalent to being hundreds of kilometers underground, while simultaneously blasting the sample with lasers to simulate the heat. What they found changed geology. Under these extreme conditions, the minerals didn't just crack or melt, they changed their structure. They morphed into new high-pressure forms that acted like molecular cages, and inside these cages, there was room for hydrogen and oxygen. The experiments proved that rock under sufficient pressure acts like a sponge. It can absorb and hold onto water molecules within its crystal lattice. It doesn't look wet. It remains solid stone, but chemically, it is saturated. This discovery opened the door to a hidden world, a potential ocean locked in the stone beneath our feet. The smoking gun for this theory was found inside a diamond that had been vomited up by a volcano from the deep mantle. Inside the diamond was a tiny impurity, a speck of a mineral called ringwoodite. This mineral only forms at depths of around 400 to 600 kilometers in the transition zone between the upper and lower mantle. When scientists analyzed this tiny blue speck, they found that it contained a significant amount of water, about 1.5% of its weight. That sounds small, but the transition zone is vast. If the entire zone is made of this ringwoodite, and if it is all as wet as that sample, then the math is staggering. It implies that there is a reservoir of water deep inside the Earth that is equal to 3 times the volume of all the surface oceans combined. We are floating on a hidden sea. The Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, these are just the overflow. They are the puddles on the surface. The true ocean is solid, hot, and buried 400 m down, locked in a crystal cage of blue mineral. So, how did this deep water reach the surface? The engine was heat. The young Earth was a geologically violent place. Its interior was churning with radioactive heat and the residual energy of its formation. This heat drove massive volcanic activity on a scale we can scarcely imagine. Millions of volcanoes, vents, and fissures opened up across the cooling crust. As the molten rock rose from the mantle, the pressure released. The water that had been trapped in the crystal structure of the deep rocks was liberated. It flashed into steam. For millions of years, the volcanoes didn't just spew lava. They spewed gas. They pumped trillions of tons of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen into the sky. This was the great outgassing. The planet was essentially sweating its oceans out into the atmosphere. The sky turned thick and heavy with clouds. The water was no longer in the rock, but it wasn't yet on the ground. It was suspended above the planet, a global envelope of steam waiting for the moment to fall. The stage was set for the deluge. Before the first drop could fall, the Earth had to wait. It was trapped in a long, suffocating pause. The atmosphere was not the thin, transparent veil we know today. It was a crushing, dense blanket of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and volcanic gases. The pressure at the surface was immense, perhaps hundreds of mess greater than it is now. It was a pressure cooker on a planetary scale. In this environment, the concept of weather did not exist. There was only a uniform, blinding whiteness. The sun was invisible, a diffuse glow hidden behind miles of superheated fog. The temperature hovered dangerously high, kept aloft by the runaway greenhouse effect of the steam itself. It was a world of suspended animation, a planet holding its breath, waiting for the fever to break. The water was there, billions of tons of it, but it was trapped in the sky, refusing to touch the ground. The planet was locked in a standoff between the cooling vacuum of space and the radiating heat of the molten crust. The cooling was inevitable, but it was slow. Heat radiated away, escaping into the dark, and the temperature of the upper atmosphere began to drop. It crossed a critical threshold. The water vapor molecules, which had been vibrating with thermal energy for millions of years, began to slow down. They clumped together. They condensed. High in the stratosphere, the first clouds formed, not the fluffy white clouds of a summer day, but dark, heavy, bruising storm cells that spanned the entire globe. And then it happened. A single drop of water condensed around a speck of volcanic dust. It grew heavy enough to overcome the updrafts of the hot air below. It fell. It fell through the kilometer of steam, surviving the heat, and struck the black, jagged surface of the cooling basalt. It likely did not make a splash. The ground was still too hot. The drop would have hit with a violent hiss, flashing instantly back into steam. For centuries, this was the cycle. Vera, rain that evaporates before it hits the ground. A phantom rain, but the rock was losing its battle. Each drop that hit and evaporated stole a tiny fraction of heat from the ground. Drop by drop, hiss by hiss, the surface cooled. And finally, one drop landed and stayed. It was the beginning of the end for the dry world. Once the cycle began, it did not stop. This was the Great Deluge. It was a storm that defies human categorization. It did not rain for days or weeks or months. Geological models suggest that once the atmosphere destabilized, it rained continuously for perhaps 10,000 years, maybe even a million. It was a deluge of biblical proportions, but with no one there to witness it. Imagine the sound, the relentless, deafening roar of water hammering against rock, unbroken by silence. Day or night, century after century, lightning would have been constant, tearing through the dark, steam-choked sky, illuminating a landscape that was being washed clean. This was not fresh, gentle rainwater. It was hot, and it was acidic. As the rain fell through the carbon-rich atmosphere, it absorbed carbon dioxide, turning into carbonic acid. It didn't just wash the rocks, it dissolved them. It etched the mountains and scoured the valleys, stripping the crust of its salts and minerals. It was a violent chemical scrubbing, a planetary baptism that washed away the sins of the Hadean eon. Where did the water go? The Earth of this time had no continents as we know them. There were no green plains or high mountain ranges to catch the rain. The surface was a jagged, chaotic landscape of volcanic peaks and vast low-lying impact craters left over from the bombardment. The water followed the simple law of gravity. It flowed downhill. Rias became streams. Streams became raging torrents of grey, hot sludge, and torrents became rivers. They poured into the great basins, the scars of the ancient impacts. At first they were just puddles, steaming shallow pools in the bottom of craters. But the rain kept falling. The puddles connected. They deepened. They swallowed the lands. The lava fields were submerged, hissing and cooling into pillow basalts under the rising tide. Slowly, inexorably, the black rock was hidden beneath a rising blanket of grey. The magma ocean was being replaced by a water ocean. And when the clouds finally broke, when the sun finally pierced the thinning veil of the atmosphere, it shone down not on a red planet, but on a new world, a world of islands scattered across a global steaming sea. The rain finally stopped, the clouds thinned, and the sun broke through. But the world revealed below was not the Earth we know. If you could stand on one of the lonely volcanic peaks poking through the waves 3 and 12 billion years ago, you would be looking out at an alien sea. The ocean was not blue. It was a murky, heavy olive green. The water was rich in dissolved iron. In our modern world, oxygen in the atmosphere reacts with iron to create rust, which settles out of the water. But in the early Earth, there was no free oxygen. The iron remained dissolved, suspended in the liquid, giving the global ocean a metallic, toxic taste and a deep green hue. The sky above was likely not blue either, but a hazy pinkish-orange, colored by high levels of methane and carbon dioxide. It was a landscape of sickly colors, a green ocean under an orange sky, hot, heavy, and utterly hostile to the life that would come later. The water was scalding perhaps nearly 100 degrees C at the surface, a global bath that was just below the boiling point. The most striking feature of this early water world was what was missing. There were no continents. The great land masses of Africa, Asia, and the Americas had not yet formed. The granite that makes up the core of our continents is a lighter rock that floats high on the mantle, but the process of creating it, distilling it from the heavier basalt, takes billions of years of tectonic churning. In the Hadean and early Archean eons, this process was just beginning. The Earth was a water world, a single, unbroken global ocean covered 95, perhaps 99% of the planet. The only land consisted of chains of black volcanic islands, similar to modern-day Hawaii or Iceland, spewing ash into the wind. Because there were no continents to act as brakes, the ocean currents were ferocious. They circled the equator in unimpeded superfast loops. The tides, pulled by a moon that was much closer to Earth than it is today, were extreme. Tsunami-sized waves scoured the volcanic islands twice a day, dragging debris back into the green depths. It was a world of violent hydrodynamics, a restless churning machine of water and stone. Rainwater is fresh. The water that fell for 1,000,000 years was distilled pure steam. So why is the ocean salty? The salt did not come from the sky. It came from the rock. The atmosphere of the early Earth was thick with carbon dioxide and sulfur. When the rain fell through this gas, it became carbonic and sulfuric acid. This acidic rain attacked the volcanic rocks on the islands with chemical ferocity. It broke down the crystal lattice of the stone, leaching out ions, sodium, chloride, calcium, magnesium. These minerals dissolved into the rainwater and flowed in rivers down to the sea. This is the Great Titration. For billions of years, the rivers have been acting as a conveyor belt, stripping the continents of their salt and dumping it into the ocean. And once the salt is in the ocean, it is trapped. The water evaporates to form new rain, but the salt stays behind. It concentrates. Over eons, this slow, invisible chemical weathering turned the fresh, acidic flood of the Hadean into the salty alkaline brine of today. Every cup of seawater contains the dissolved ghost of a mountain that was washed away long ago. The ocean is not just water. It is a liquid fossil of the land. To find the true purpose of this new global ocean, we must dive. Must leave the storm-tossed, radiation-bathed surface and descend into the crushing blackness of the abyss. Here, along the fracture lines of the ocean floor, where the crust is thin and the magma is close, we find a phenomenon that bridges the gap between the geosphere and the biosphere. These are the hydrothermal vents. In the darkness, they look like chimneys, towering spires of mineral deposit, belching black and white smoke into the water. But this is not smoke. It is superheated fluid, water that has seeped down into the crust, touched the magma, and shot back up, loaded with minerals. This is the meeting point of the planet's two great forces, fire and water. One specific type of vent, known as the Lost City Fields, creates a unique environment. Here, the water is alkaline, warm and rich in hydrogen gas. It bubbles up through microscopic honeycomb chambers in the rock. These rock chambers act like tiny test tubes. In this warm, mineral-rich darkness protected from the chaotic violence of the surface, the water is doing something extraordinary. It is organizing. It is acting as a medium for complex chemistry, churning the raw elements of the earth until they begin to resemble something organized. Water is not a passive stage for life. It is the active ingredient. In the Hadean and Archean oceans, the water acted as the universal solvent. It dissolved the minerals from the vents. It caught the carbon-rich dust falling from the asteroid impacts. It absorbed the lightning-charged gases from the atmosphere. It took all these chaotic, disparate ingredients and mixed them together in a global solution. This was the primordial soup. But soup implies a mess. Water does something more than just mix its structures. Inside the microscopic pores of the hydrothermal vents, the water molecules surrounded the organic compounds, protecting them, allowing them to concentrate. It allowed D-amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, to link together. It allowed fatty acids to form bubbles, the precursors to cell membranes. It was a process of billions of trials and errors, a chemical lottery played out over eons in the dark. The water provided the safe harbor, the temperature buffer, and the transportation network that allowed these molecules to meet, to interact, and eventually to replicate. The ocean was not just a body of water, it was a planetary womb. Why water? Why is life on Earth not built on liquid methane, or ammonia, or silicon? The answer lies in the strange, sticky physics of the water molecule itself. Water is a dipole. It has a positive end and a negative end like a tiny magnet. This allows it to dissolve almost anything, breaking down nutrients so they can be transported. But more importantly, it allows structure. Consider DNA, the spiral ladder that holds the code of life. DNA is held together by hydrophobic interactions. Parts of the molecule hate water and curl inward, while parts love water and face outward. The shape of DNA, the double helix itself, is sculpted by the water that surrounds it. Without water to push and pull on these molecules, our genetic code would unravel into chaos. Proteins fold into their functional shapes only because of how they interact with water. Life is in its essence a complex dance of molecules suspended in H2O. We are not just creatures that drink water. We are creatures made of water, organized by water, and sustained by the unique, anomalous physics of this single, simple molecule. The ocean didn't just birth us. It is still inside us, holding our very cells together. Water is familiar to us. It is the most common substance in our lives. But to a chemist, water is a freak. By the strict rules of the periodic table, liquid water should not exist on Earth. H2O is a tiny light molecule. Based on its weight, HT, and structure, it should behave like its chemical cousins, ammonia or methane. It should be a gas at room temperature. On a planet like ours, all the water should have boiled away into vapor or frozen into ice ages ago. There should be no liquid middle ground. But water cheats. It survives as a liquid because of a unique property called hydrogen bonding. The water molecules are sticky. The hydrogen atoms of one molecule are magnetically attracted to the oxygen atoms of its neighbors. They cling to each other with a ghostly transient grip, forming a shifting web that holds the molecules together against the urge to fly apart into gas. This invisible web is what gives water its surface tension, allowing insects to walk on it, and it is what allows water to remain liquid over such a vast range of temperatures. Without this molecular stickiness, the oceans would evaporate, our blood would boil, and the Earth would be enveloped in a dry, toxic fog. There is another rule that water breaks, a rule so fundamental that we rarely think about it. In the physical universe, when a substance gets cold, it contracts, its molecules pack tighter together, it becomes denser, and it gets heavier. Solid rock sinks in molten rock, solid iron sinks in molten iron. But water does the opposite. As it approaches the freezing point, the molecules arrange themselves into a rigid, hexagonal crystal structure. To fit into this shape, they have to push apart. Ice is less dense than water. It expands, it floats. This anomaly is the only reason we are here. Imagine if water obeyed the normal laws of physics. Ice would be heavier than water. In winter, the ice forming on the surface of the ocean would sink to the bottom. The dark abyss would fill up with layer after layer of sunken ice shielded from the sun, never melting. The oceans would freeze from the bottom up, turning into solid blocks of ice that would lock away the planet's water forever. Life would be crushed or frozen out of existence. But because ice floats, it forms a skin on the surface. This skin acts as an insulating blanket, trapping the heat in the water below, keeping the deep ocean liquid and warm enough for life to survive even the harshest ice ages. The third magic trick of water is its relationship with heat. Water has an incredibly high heat capacity. It is stubborn. It takes a massive amount of energy to warm it up. And once it is warm, it refuses to let that heat go. Rock, by comparison, is fickle. In the desert, where there is no water, the temperature can swing from blistering heat at noon to freezing cold at midnight. The rock cooks and then freezes instantly. But the oceans act as a planetary stabilizer. They are a thermal battery. During the day, they absorb the fierce radiation of the sun without boiling. At night, they slowly release that stored heat into the atmosphere, keeping the planet from freezing. Without the oceans to moderate the climate, the Earth would be a world of violent, lethal temperature swings. The equator would be an oven, and the poles would be absolute zero. The currents of the ocean, the Gulf Stream and the Croyo, are the plumbing system that moves this heat around, taking warmth from the tropics and delivering it to the north. We live in the comfortable, temperate zone created by this global air conditioning system, unaware that we are being protected from the void by the stubborn thermal memory of water. We tend to think of the ocean as a permanent fixture, a bathtub that stays filled. But the ocean floor is actually a moving conveyor belt. At the bottom of the deepest trenches, like the Mariana, the tectonic plates of the Earth are colliding. One plate slides beneath another, plunging down into the hot, viscous mantle. This is the process of subduction. And as the rock goes down, it takes the ocean with it. The water does not pour down a hole like a drain. It is chemically locked into the crust. The rocks of the seafloor are saturated, hydrated by millions of years of pressure. As these massive slabs of stone descend into the fire of the interior, they carry trillions of tons of water with them, dragging the ocean deep underground. Recent seismic studies suggest that at the Mariana Trench alone, 3 times more water is being swallowed by the Earth than we previously calculated. It is a slow, silent leak. The planet is drinking its own oceans, pulling them back into the deep reservoir from which they likely came billions of years ago. But the Earth is a cycle, not a tomb. What goes down must eventually come up. The water dragged down by the subducting plates does not stay buried forever. As the rock heats up in the mantle, the water is squeezed out. It rises, mixing with molten rock to fuel the explosive volcanoes of the Ring of Fire. But sometimes it returns in a stranger form. On the floor of the Pacific, there are mountains that do not spew fire. They spew mud. These are the cold seep mud volcanoes, towering structures formed by the eruption of crushed rock and deep pressurized water from the subduction zone. They are the vents of the planet's internal plumbing system. They release fluids that have been trapped underground for aeons, water that has cycled through the very heart of the world. This hidden cycle from rain to ocean to mantle and back to volcano acts as a long-term regulator. It ensures that while the surface oceans may rise and fall, the planet itself never truly dries out. This deep water does more than just cycle. It performs a function that keeps the Earth alive. Geology tells us that plate tectonics, the shifting of continents, the building of mountains, the recycling of the crust is unique to Earth in our solar system. Venus is a planet of the same size and composition, yet its surface is a single locked, stagnant lid. It has no tectonic plates. Why? The answer again is water. Water acts as a planetary lubricant in the deep crust and upper mantle. Water molecules soften the rock. They lower the melting point and reduce the friction between the vast plates of stone. Without water, the Earth's crust would be dry, rigid, and seized up. The continents would freeze in place. The recycling of carbon would stop. The volcanoes would die. The planet would become geologically Kimomaus, just like Venus. It is the water slicking the gears of the deep Earth that allows the continents to drift. The very ground we walk on is mobile only because it is floating on a hidden layer of wet rock. The ocean is not just a habitat. It is the engine oil of the planet. To fully appreciate the strange beauty of Earth's open water, we must look at the competition. For a long time, we believed we were the only water world in the solar system. We were wrong. There are other oceans out there, but they are hiding. Orbiting Jupiter is the moon Europa, a ball of fractured white ice. Orbiting Saturn is Enceladus, a tiny glittering snowball. To the eye, they look dead and frozen. But gravity tells a different story. As these moons orbit their massive gas giant parents, they are squeezed and stretched by immense tidal forces. This friction generates heat deep inside their cores. This internal heat melts the ice from the bottom up. Beneath the miles-thick rock-hard shell of ice on Europa, there is a liquid saltwater ocean that may be 60 miles deep. It contains more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. But it is a stealth ocean. It exists in eternal darkness, cut off from the sun, the atmosphere. It is a sea trapped in a planetary pressure cooker, warm and mineral-rich, but forever sealed, aired away by a roof of ice. This comparison reveals the true anomaly of Earth. In the universe, it seems that the default state for liquid water is to be hidden, to be buried beneath a protective crust of rock or ice. Underground oceans might be common, but a surface ocean, a naked ocean like ours, is rare. Our water lies open to the sky. It interacts with the wind to create waves. It evaporates to create rain. It reflects the light of the sun. This openness makes our planet vulnerable. Without the protection of a thick ice shell, our oceans rely entirely on the delicate balance of the atmosphere and the magnetic field to keep them from boiling away into space or freezing solid. We are walking a tightrope. The beauty of the Pacific or the Atlantic lies in their exposure. They are the lungs of the planet, exchanging gases with the air, driving the climate, and creating the chaotic sunlit environments where complex life could evolve eyes to see the stars. The hidden oceans of Europa may have life, but it is life that will never know the concept of a horizon. The story of water does not end with the geology of the planet. It continues inside you. When life finally crawled out of the ocean onto dry land hundreds of millions of years ago, it faced a crisis. It was leaving the womb. On land, the air is dry and the sun is harsh. To survive, life had to take the ocean with it. It had to internalize the environment it was leaving behind. You are a vessel for this ancient sea. The human body is roughly 60% water, but it is not fresh water. Your blood plasma, your sweat, and your tears are salty. The concentration of salt in your fluids is remarkably similar to the salinity of the primordial oceans where life first began. We never truly left the water. We simply built spacesuits of skin and bone to carry it around with us. Every time your heart beats, it is pumping a chemically modified version of the Arcan Sea through your veins. We are walking, breathing aquariums, keeping the memory of the deep past alive in our own physiology. If you zoom in further past the organs and the tissues down to the microscopic level of the single cell, you find the same truth. The interior of a cell, it is a microscopic ocean. The machinery of life, the DNA, the proteins, the mitochondria, does not function in a vacuum or in a solid. It floats. These molecules are suspended in water, pushed and pulled by the same thermal currents and chemical properties that govern the tides. The folding of a protein, the precise shape that allows it to do its job, is dictated by how it interacts with water molecules. The transmission of a nerve signal is a flow of ions through a watery channel. In the most literal sense, life is just a complex, organized dance of water. Without the solvent, the dance stops. The dry land we stand on is an illusion. At the cellular level, we are all still swimming. Consider for a moment the water in the glass beside your bed. It looks simple. It looks clear. But every drop has a history that spans the entire age of the solar system. That water was forged in the death throes of a star frozen in the deep cold of the outer solar nebula and carried to Earth inside a rocky asteroid during the Great Bombardment. It has cycled through the planet for 4.5 billion years. It has been steam in the Hadean atmosphere. It has been part of a glacier that crushed a continent. It has been swallowed by a dinosaur and transpired by a giant fern. It has been dragged down into the mantle and spewed back out by a volcano. The water you drink is not new. It is recycled, purified by the great planetary distillation of evaporation and rain. You are drinking the same molecules that rain down on the cooling crust of the infant Earth. The water is the only witness to the entire story. But this story will not last forever. The Earth is a closed system, but it is not perfectly sealed. High in the upper atmosphere, where the air is thin, ultraviolet radiation from the sun breaks water molecules apart. The oxygen stays, but the hydrogen, being light, can escape the pull of gravity. It drifts away into space. This is atmospheric escape. It is a slow, invisible leak. Every second, Earth loses a tiny fraction of its water to the void. Over billions of years, this process will dry the planet out. As the sun ages and grows, brighter the heat will accelerate this loss. The oceans will eventually boil. The atmosphere will be stripped away, and Earth will become a parched, dead rock, much like Mars or Venus. The blue marble is a temporary state, a wet phase in the long, dry life of a planet. We are living in the golden age of water. But that end is far, far away. For now, the cycle holds. The sun heats the ocean. The water rises as a vapor, the clouds form, and the rain falls. It is the heartbeat of the biosphere. Listen to the sound of rain against the window. It is a sound that has been heard on this planet for 4 billion years. It is the sound of the atmosphere cooling the rock. It is the sound of the ocean returning to the land. We are drawn to this sound. We find the noise of waves crashing on the shore or the steady drum of a rainstorm deeply instinctively soothing. Perhaps this is because, in a very real sense, it is the sound of home. We are creatures of the water, exiles from the ocean, living on dry land, carrying our own internal sea within us. The sound of water reconnects us to our origins, to the time when we were just simple cells floating in the warm chemical broth of the early Earth. And so the story of the water's origin is complete. We have traced the journey of the drop from the burning heart of a comet to the quiet glass beside your bed. The cycle is closed. For many of you, I hope the rhythm of this journey has already done its work. I hope the sound of the eternal rain has carried you into the deep, dreamless drift of sleep. If you are drifting off, let go. You are safe. But perhaps you are still here. Perhaps the silence has not yet taken you. If you are still listening, if your mind is still wandering in the quiet dark, and you are not ready to sleep, I have something else for you. A different kind of story. We have spent this time talking about the water, but we have not spoken about what the water is hiding. There is a mystery that lies not in the fluid, but underneath it. So, if you are still with me, let's stay in the dark a little longer. Let's lower the sea level in our minds and look at the things that the Earth has chosen to forget. Our search for the lost lands begins in the vast, seemingly empty expanse of the South Pacific. If you look at a standard map, you see Australia and thousands of miles to the east, the islands of New Zealand. Between them lies nothing but blue water. It looks like a void, a blank space on the map of the world. But if you were to strip away that water, if you could pull the plug on the Pacific Ocean, you would see something that defies geography books. New Zealand is not an island chain. It is merely the highest mountain peak of a sunken giant. Beneath the waves lies a sprawling landmass nearly 2/3 the size of Australia. It has mountains, it has valleys, it has plateaus. It is a distinct continuous piece of continental crust that broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana 80 million years ago. Scientists call it Zealandia, or in the indigenous Maui language, Tu Amaui. It is the Earth's 8th continent, but unlike the others, Zealandia could not keep its head above water. Its story is a geological tragedy. As it drifted away from Australia and Antarctica, it behaved like hot taffy being pulled apart. It became thinner and thinner, and as it thinned, it lost its buoyancy. It became heavy. The underlying mantle could no longer support it. 23 million years ago, the ocean rushed in. The valleys flooded first, then the plains, and finally the hills. 94% of the continent was drowned, disappearing into the blue silence. We must try to imagine the world that was lost. Before it sank, Zealandia was a lush green raft. It was covered in ancient aurea forests, giant ferns, and unique biological experiments. Because it broke away from Gondwana before the rise of mammals, it became a sanctuary for birds and reptiles. It was a land where dinosaurs might have lingered longer, where the tuatara, a reptile that is the last survivor of a lineage older than the dinosaurs, still walks today on the few peaks that remain above water. When we sail across the Tasman Sea, we are floating over a lost world. We are moving over fossilized forests and ancient riverbeds that have not felt the sun for 20 million years. It is a ghost continent, a sleeping giant that lies just beneath our keel, waiting in the dark. While Zealandia was lost to the deep, silent rhythms of geological time millions of years before the first eye opened to see it, other lands were lost to human time. To find one of the most poignant and haunting of these drowned worlds, we must travel to the cold, grey and turbulent waters of the North Sea, the stretch of ocean that only separates Great Britain from the rest of mainland Europe. Today, this is a rough, inhospitable sea, a place of oil rigs, wind farms, and heavy industrial truers. It feels permanent, a barrier of salt and storm. But this barrier is new. Just 8,000 years ago, a blink of an eye in the life of the planet, this sea did not exist. Instead, there was a paradise. This was Dogland. It was not merely a land bridge, a narrow strip of dirt for crossing. It was a vast, lush and vibrant subcontinent. It was the true heart of Europe. Imagine a continuous rolling landscape of tundra, wetlands and rich grasslands that connected the limestone cliffs of England directly to the flat coasts of Denmark and the Netherlands. The Thames did not flow into the sea. It was a tributary joining the Rhine to form a massive European super river that wound its way lazily across the plains before emptying into the Atlantic. Great herds of woolly mammoths, reindeer, and wild horses roamed here, grazing on a landscape that is now buried under 50 m of crushing salt water. It was perhaps the richest hunting ground in the entire northern hemisphere. a place of abundance that supported thousands of our Mesolithic ancestors. We know this not because of myths or legends, but because the sea sometimes gives back what it stole. For centuries, Dutch and English fishermen dragging their heavy-weighted nets across the bottom of the North Sea have pulled up things that do not belong in the ocean. They do not just catch fish, they catch the black fossilized tusks of mammoths, they catch the skulls of woolly rhinos and the antlers of giant Irish elk. And most chillingly, they catch the tools of men. They find harpoons carved from antler, stone axes, and the delicate bones of humans who lived, loved, and died on a land that is now a seabed. These artifacts are the debris of a drowned civilization. The tang, ibble, heavy proof that where the waves now roll, there was once the smoke of campfires. The end of Dogland was a slow-motion apocalypse that lasted for millennia. As the great ice sheets of the last ice age began their final collapse, the global sea levels rose. Year by year, generation by generation, the water crept inward. The Great Plains turned into salt marshes. The marshes turned into tidal flats. The forests died, their roots poisoned by the encroaching salt, leaving behind ghost forests of preserved stumps that can still be seen at extremely low tides. On the English coast, the people of Dogland were refugees of a climate catastrophe, forced to retreat to higher ground, moving slowly toward the hills of what would become Britain and the Netherlands. But the final blow was not slow. It was sudden, violent, and terrifying. Around 6,200 BC, a massive geological trauma occurred off the coast of Norway. A colossal section of the continental shelf collapsed in an event known as the Stoga Slide. This underwater landslide moved an incomprehensible volume of rock and sediment, triggering a mega tsunami. A wall of water, perhaps 20 m high, raced across the North Sea. It slammed into the low-lying marshy remnants of Doggerland with the force of a bomb. It devastated the coastline, drowning the remaining islands and sweeping away the human settlements in a single afternoon. When the water receded, the land was poisoned, broken, and largely gone. Britain was severed from Europe. The heartland was erased. Doggerland became a memory preserved only in the mud and the silence of the sea floor, waiting for a fisherman's net to bring its secrets back to the light. Far to the south, in the most desolate and windswept reaches of the Indian Ocean, halfway between Africa, Australia, and Antarctica, lies another sunken titan. This is the Kerguelen Plateau. If you look at a map today, all OE will see are the tiny, jagged Kerguelen Islands, also known as the Desolation Islands. They are bleak, treeless peaks, battered by the ceaseless fury of the circumpolar winds. But these islands are just the tip of the iceberg. They are the summits of a submerged microcontinent that is 3 times the size of Japan. Unlike Zealandia, which is a fragment of old continental crust, Kerguelen was born of fire. It is a large, igneous province, a massive accumulation of volcanic rock created by a hotspot deep within the mantle that erupted continuously for millions of years, building a new landmass in the middle of the growing ocean. There was a time roughly 100 million years ago during the Cretaceous period when this plateau was not a dark abyss. It was a lush, verdant bridge. Sediment cores drilled from the underwater plateau reveal a startling history. Buried beneath the layers of marine ooze are traces of ancient soil, charcoal, and fossilized pollen. These microscopic clues tell us that this sunken land was once covered in dense forests of ferns and conifers, similar to the temperate rainforests of modern-day New Zealand or Patagonia. It was a green island arc, a stepping stone for dinosaurs and early mammals migrating between India and Antarctica before the continents drifted too far apart. Now it is a silent underwater plain scoured by deep ocean currents, a drowned empire of basalt where the only inhabitants are deep-sea fish and the ghosts of a forest that drowned eons ago. The story of the drowned worlds is not merely a chapter of history. It is a prophecy of our own future. We have a tendency to view the map of the world as a static, finished painting. We draw borders, we build coastal cities, and we pave highways along the shoreline as if the land is permanent. But geology teaches us that the coastline is not a fixed line. It is a transient moving boundary. We are currently living in an interglacial period, a brief warm pause between the ice. But as we have learned, the ice is melting again. And the cycle of marine transgression, the invasion of the sea, is beginning once more. If we look at the map of the modern Earth with the eyes of a geologist, We are looking at the future lost continents. The low-lying limestone peninsula of Florida, the vast river deltas of Bangladesh, and the Mekong, the string of coral-led holes in the Pacific. These are temporary features in the deep time of the planet. They are as ephemeral as a sand castle built at low tide. As the oceans expand, reclaiming the water stored in the ice, these lands will follow the fate of Dogland. Our cities of glass and steel, currently shining in the sun, will become the underwater ruins of the future, colonized by coral and kelp. The ocean is patient. It has claimed continents before, and it will claim them again. The water we drink, the water that sustains us, is also the water that waits to consume the land. We build our civilizations on the edge of the beast, hoping it remains asleep. But the history of the earth whispers that the beast always eventually wakes up. But the water is not the only thing protecting us, nor is it the only thing shifting beneath our feet. High above the atmosphere, extending thousands of miles into the black vacuum of space, there is an invisible shimmering force field that makes complex life on Earth possible. It is the magnetosphere. It is a colossal bubble of magnetic energy generated by the violent churning ocean of molten iron in the planet's outer core. It acts as a deflector shield, tearing apart the deadly solar wind and blocking the cosmic radiation that would otherwise strip away our atmosphere, boil our oceans, and sterilize the surface. Without this invisible armor, Earth would be a dead red rock, stripped bare like Mars. ND to think of this shield as permanent, uniform, and unbreakable, but it is not. Right now, there is a dent in the armor, a growing breach in the hull of the planet. Stretching from the coast of Brazil across the vast expanse of the South Atlantic Ocean and reaching the shores of southern Africa is a region known as the South Atlantic Anomaly. Here, the Earth's magnetic field is drastically, inexplicably weaker than anywhere else on the globe. It is a ghost zone. In this region, the Van Allen radiation belts, rings of energetic charged particles held in place by the magnetosphere, dip dangerously low, grazing the upper atmosphere. To the human eye, looking up from the deck of a ship, the sky looks normal, but to the sensitive electronics of our civilization, this region is the Bermuda Triangle of space. When low-orbit satellites pass through this anomaly, they are bombarded by intense, unimpeded cosmic radiation. Computers glitch and crash. Data is corrupted. The Hubble Space Telescope is actually programmed to shut down its sensitive optical sensors when it flies over this region to avoid being fried by the glare of the cosmos. It is a widening chasm in our defense, a physical manifestation of a turbulence deep within the Earth's core that we are only just beginning to understand. The iron ocean down there is restless, and the storm it is creating is tearing a hole in the sky above our heads. This anomaly is not an isolated event. It is a symptom of a much larger planetary-scale restlessness. We build our navigation systems, our runways, and our maps based on the assumption that north is north. But the magnetic North Pole is not a fixed point. It is a traveler. For centuries, it meandered slowly across the Canadian Arctic, drifting like a lazy barge. But in the 1990s, something changed. The pole began to accelerate. It is currently racing across the Arctic Ocean. Moving away from Canada and towards Siberia at a speed of over 30 m per year. It is moving so fast that the World Magnetic Model, the mathematical foundation of all modern navigation, from smartphones to submarines, has to be updated ahead of schedule, just to keep up with the drift. But this drift is nothing compared to what the planet is capable of. The geological record written in the alignment of magnetic minerals in ancient lava flows tells us a terrifying story. The poles have not just moved, they have flipped. Hundreds of times in Earth's history, the magnetic dynamo has become chaotic. The dipole, the clear north and south, breaks down, the field weakens to a fraction of its strength, and multiple poles can pop up all over the globe. South becomes north, north becomes south. This is a geomagnetic reversal. The last time this happened was nearly 780,000 years ago, but there were shorter temporary excursions more recently. The Lachamp event 42,000 years ago saw the field strength drop to just 5% of its current level. During that time, the shield effectively vanished. We do not know exactly what a full reversal looks like from the ground, but the models are haunting. It would not be a quick flip. It could take centuries or millennia of magnetic chaos. During this transition, the sky would change. The auroras, currently confined to the poles, would bleed downward, lighting up the night skies at the equator. We would see curtains of neon green and red fire dancing over the pyramids of Egypt and the jungles of the Amazon. It would be a time of terrible beauty and profound vulnerability, a moment when the invisible walls come down and the earth is left open to the full, unfiltered fury of the sun. The anomaly in the South Atlantic suggests that the core is already preparing the machinery for the next great flip. While we anxiously watch the weakening shield above our heads, we remain largely ignorant of the alien world that lies beneath our feet. For centuries, biologists operated under the assumption that life was a surface phenomenon, a thin, fragile green skin clinging to the crust, dependent entirely on the energy of the sun. But in recent decades, deep ocean drilling projects and mines penetrating miles into the continental crust have revealed a shocking truth. Life does not stop at the surface. It goes down, deep down. Scientists have pulled up core samples from 3M beneath the ocean floor, solid basalt rock that has been buried for millions of years, and found it teeming with life. These are not the creatures of the light. These are the intraterrestrials. They are bacteria and archaea, living not in caves or underground lakes, but in the microscopic fluid-filled pores of the solid rock itself. They live in a world of eternal crushing darkness, under pressures that would pulverize a submarine, and at temperatures that would boil water on the surface. This is the deep biosphere. It is a discovery that has fundamentally rewritten our understanding of the planet. Estimates suggest that this subterranean realm is so vast that it may contain more biomass, more sheer living weight than all the forests, animals, and humans on the surface combined. The Earth is not just a rock with life on it. It is a rock that is alive, permeated with a hidden biological lattice that extends miles into the crust. But the life down there is not like the life up here. On the surface, biology is fast. It is a frantic race for energy. A bacterium in a petri dish or a puddle might divide every 20 minutes. But in the deep biosphere, resources are scarce. There is no sunlight, no fresh flow of organic matter. These organisms must survive on the faint chemical energy released by the cooling of the Earth or the slow radioactive decay of uranium in the surrounding stone. Because energy is so limited, they have evolved to live in extreme slow motion. They are the zombies of the deep rock. Studies of these deep Earth microbes suggest that they do not divide in minutes or days. A single cell might take 100 years, 1,000 years, or perhaps even 10,000 years to divide just once. They exist in a state of metabolic suspension, barely distinguishing between being alive and being dead. They are living statues, existing on a timescale that borders on immortality. They have been down there for millions of years, trapped in their stone cells, indifferent to the extinction of the dinosaurs, indifferent to the ice ages, indifferent to the rise of humanity. To them, the chaotic events of the surface are just a fleeting ripple. They are the true owners of the planet, the dark matter of biology, waiting patiently in the stone for the world to change. The existence of this deep-hidden history leads us to a question that borders on science fiction. Yet it is a question asked not by conspiracy theorists, but by serious climatologists and astrophysicists. It is a thought experiment known as the Curon hypothesis. It forces us to confront a blind spot in our perception of time. We assume that we are the first. We look at our cities, our technology, our global footprint, and we believe that we are the singular pinnacle of intelligence on this planet. But the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Modern industrial humanity has existed for perhaps 300 years. That is a ratio so small it is statistically negligible. The hypothesis asks a simple sun-settling question. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, long before humans, would we know? If a species of reptile in the Triassic or a species of mammal in the Paleocene had built cities, burned fuel, and created art, would any physical trace of them remain today to tell us they were here? Our intuition tells us yes. We look at the pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the skyscrapers of Manhattan, and we feel that these are permanent monuments. We believe we are carving an indelible mark into the face of the planet. But to the Earth, our civilization is nothing more than a temporary texture. The planet is a recycling machine of brutal efficiency. Let us run the simulation. Imagine that humanity vanishes tomorrow. What happens to the physical proof of our existence? We are proud of our engineering, but nature is patient and relentless. Within, A few centuries, moisture and oxidation will cause our steel structures to rust and collapse. The concrete, stripped of its reinforcement, will crack and crumble into sand. Within a few thousand years, the roots of the recovering forests will grind our cities into dust and bury them under layers of soil. But the erasure goes deeper than that. The crust of the Earth itself is in motion. Over a time scale of millions of years, the very tectonic plates we stand on will slide, crumple, and melt. The continents will be reshaped. Glaciers will scour the land down to the bedrock, erasing everything that stood upon it. The fossil record, which we rely on so heavily, is not a complete library. It is a shredded book. We have fossils of dinosaurs, yes, but we only have fossils of a tiny, infinite decimal fraction of the animals that actually lived. The odds of a specific species fossilizing are close to zero. If an advanced civilization lasted for only 10,000 years, the span of our own history so far, and then collapsed, it would appear in the geological record as a layer of sediment no thicker than a sheet of paper. It would be indistinguishable from a natural event. The physical ruins of an empire do not survive deep time. What remains? How would we detect a ghost civilization? The scientists behind the Curran hypothesis suggest that we shouldn't look for objects. We should look for chemistry. We should look for the same signals that we are leaving behind right now. When a civilization burns massive amounts of fossil fuels, it changes the carbon signature of the atmosphere. It releases a specific type of light carbon, carbon-12, which is absorbed by the oceans and locked into the sediment. Future geologists millions of years from now will not find our cars, but they will find this spike in carbon isotopes in the rock. They will see a sudden, inexplicable fever in the planet's temperature record. They will find a layer of technofossils, strange unnatural molecules like plastics, and persistent synthetic chemicals that do not decay for eons. They might even find a layer of plutonium-244, a radioactive isotope that does not exist in nature and can only be created by nuclear fission. These are the fingerprints of industry. They are the only things that last. Here is where the hypothesis turns from a thought experiment into a mystery. When we look back at the geological history of Earth, we do find anomalies. We find events that look suspiciously like our own Anthropocene. The most famous is the Paleocene-Ecocene thermal maximum, or the PM. Roughly 56 million years ago, the Earth underwent a sudden, drastic, and rapid global warming event. The temperature spiked, the oceans became acidic, and most importantly, there was a massive, unexplained injection of carbon into the atmosphere. The standard explanation is natural. Huge volcanic eruptions or the release of methane hydrates from the seafloor. And this is likely the truth, but the data is messy. The speed and intensity of the carbon released during the PETM is eerily similar to the rate at which we are currently burning fossil fuels. We are not saying a civilization caused it, but the Siluran hypothesis teaches us a humbling lesson. We cannot prove that one didn't. It suggests that civilization might not be a linear ladder but a cycle, a recurring fever that the planet survives, forgets, and perhaps allows to happen again. The silence of the rock may not be empty. It may simply be hiding the exhaust fumes of a forgotten empire. But the Earth is not just leaving behind chemical signals. It is actively speaking. Most of the time we move through our lives deaf to the planet. We hear the wind, the traffic, the voices of others. But there is a phenomenon that has been reported for decades, from the empty deserts of New Mexico to the foggy coastlines of England, suggesting that the Earth itself is making a sound. It is known simply as the hum. It is a low, steady, maddening drone occurring at the very threshold of human hearing. Those who hear it describe it as the sound of a diesel engine idling in a distant room, or the vibration of a massive invisible machine running deep beneath the Earth. It is a sound that ignores walls. It keeps people awake at night, vibrating in their bones, a phantom noise that cannot be recorded by standard microphones. For years it was dismissed as tinnitus or delusion, but scientists now believe it is real. It is the planetary hum. It is caused by the relentless energy of the ocean waves crashing against the continental shelves, sending microseismic tremors running through the solid crust. The entire planet is ringing like a bell, vibrating at a frequency so low it is felt more than heard. It is a reminder that the ground beneath us is not still. It is constantly trembling with the energy of the water that covers it. There is another frequency, one that comes not from the ground but from the air. It is the electrical heartbeat of the world. The space between the surface of the Earth and the conductive ionosphere miles above acts as a global electromagnetic cavity. It functions exactly like the body of a musical instrument. Every second, hundreds of lightning strikes hit the planet. These strikes act like hammers hitting a bell, causing this atmospheric cavity to resonate. This phenomenon is called the Schumann resonance. The fundamental frequency of this resonance is 7.83 Hz. It is a standing wave that encircles the planet, a constant, invisible rhythm that has existed for as long as the Earth has had an atmosphere. But here is the strange coincidence. 7.83 Hz is also the frequency of the alpha and theta waves in the human brain, the state of relaxation, meditation, and the threshold of sleep. We evolved in this electrical bath. Our biology is tuned to the frequency of the planet itself. We are not separate from the Earth. Our nervous systems are synchronized with its atmospheric pulse. It suggests a deep, invisible connection, a harmony between the mind and the world that we are only just beginning to understand. As we reach the end of this long journey, the pieces of the puzzle begin to merge into a single breathtaking image. We have looked at the water that regulates the temperature. We have looked at the magnetic shield that protects the air. We have looked at the deep biosphere that permeates the crust and the cycles of destruction and rebirth that recycle the surface. When you step back and look at these systems working in concert, the Earth stops looking like a rock. It starts looking like an organism. This is the Gaia hypothesis. It suggests that the Earth is a self-regulating complex system that maintains the conditions necessary for life. Much like a living body maintains its own temperature and chemistry, the volcanoes are the vents, the ocean is the blood, the atmosphere is the lung, the magnetic field is the skin, and we, perhaps, the neurons, the first part of this vast planetary body that has opened its eyes and awakened to consciousness. We are the way the Earth knows itself. We came here asking where the water came from. We found that it is a cosmic traveler, a survivor of the Hadean fire, and a sculptor of continents. But in tracing the water, we found ourselves. The atoms in your body were once part of the asteroid that brought the sea. The salt in your blood is the memory of the first ocean. The electrical rhythm of your brain is the echo of the lightning in the sky. We are not passengers on this ship. We are the ship. We are the temporary shapes that the water and the rock take so that they can walk and breathe and wonder. The history of the Earth is not something that happened in the past. It is happening right now in you. You are the current chapter of the story. You are the memory of the planet made flesh. And now the journey is done. The cycle is complete. The water has fallen from the sky, carved the land, and returned to the deep. The lost continents sleep in the dark. The hidden bacteria wait in the stone. And the planet hums its low, steady lullaby. You can let go now. You are part of this vast, resilient, and beautiful system. The Earth has held you since the moment you were born, and it will hold you through the night. The silence you hear is not empty. It is full of life, full of history, full of stars. Let the rhythm of the planet carry you. Let the deep time wash over you. Good night.